Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. Welcome back to a new video. Today we're going to be doing another PC build using the Corsair 280X. We're going to aim this one as a price to performance or bang for buck compact build. We've got a range of different things, so I'm going to run you through all the different parts. And there are a few different technicalities with some of the hardware we're using because admittedly this case is an older generation case now and we will be using some newer hardware with it. So there are a few things you need to note, so stay tuned and we will cover all this and try and explain it all in the simplest manner possible. So powering this system is going to be the AMD Ryzen 5 5600X. This was very kindly sent out by MemoryC.com. They're an online e-tailer that do a massive range of different electronic products. Big thank you to them for sending this over for this build. And that will be going into the B550M Steel Legend motherboard from ASRock. I picked this board because it's more of a silvery theme than just your generic black, and it will look a little bit nicer in our white case. In terms of storage, I've gone for the PNY Accelerate CS330 1TB drive. This is a Gen 3, but you could obviously use Gen 4 if you fancy, because we do use B550. But the Accelerate drive is more than fast enough for the gaming we're going to be doing. In terms of memory, I've picked the Corsair Vengeance RGB Pro SL memory. This is the newer version of the Vengeance. This is running 3600 MHz, and we've got two 8GB sticks for 16GB, and white again to match our theme. So graphics card wise, I'm going to be saying something a little bit different from most YouTubers. I'm going to be using an older generation 2070 Super. I would usually recommend something like a 3060 Ti, but just because of the market and the way it's just horrifically difficult to get graphics cards, I'm going to use an older generation one because in theory, people are after the latest and greatest, so the older generation should be a little bit easier to come by. So definitely search around to see if you can get one of these, because this will definitely pair well with the 5600X. This is the 8GB GDR6 AMP edition from Zotac, so pre-overclocked from the factory. We're going to be using the Corsair iCUE H100i Elite Capellix cooler. This is a nice white one which will go nice with the case. Now this has its own hub and proprietary connector for the cooler pump, so we will be using the hubs and stuff from that cooler rather than what's built in, so you won't actually need to use what's in there. Now you could go for the version of the case that doesn't have the fans included, I think, which is just the 280, so you do save a little bit of money not buying the commander and stuff that you're not going to use that's built in. So I'm going to be replacing the fans that are on the Elite Capellix with some LO120s just so they all sync it together and all look nice. Then finally powering it all, Corsair have sent over the SF750 power supply. Now the reason I'm using the SF750 is so that you guys that might want to use a newer case, something like the 011 Dynamic Minis, a very popular one at the moment, that takes an SF power supply, not an ATX. So I'm using the FS power supply on the basis that if you buy a case that isn't this one, it might not take a full size power supply, so this is the way you need to go. So a few technicalities using the newer cooler but with the older case, but it is a lot more simple than it may sound, and I'll try and make this sound as concise as possible. But for now, let's get into the build. So first of all, we're going to install our Ryzen 5 5600X. So again, a big thank you to MemoryC for sending this over. So let's lift up the latch for our Steel Legend motherboard. Now it's going to be typically 90 degrees right when the motherboard's in portrait, so we're not going to be going like this, we're going to be going like that, one turn clockwise, drop it in, give it a wiggle, make sure it's nice and safe in there, drop down the latch, and that's done. Very simple. We're going to be using the mounting brackets that are pre-installed on this motherboard because Corsair have got a nice little easy clip that goes over for the cooler, so we're not going to be taking those off like if you would use the stock cooler. Next up, the M.2. I'm going to grab my smaller iFixit screwdriver for this because it's a little bit more fiddly than every other screw that's in the box or that we're going to be using in the case. Now this has some thermal pads on. I've removed these because I've used this board before just to make sure it's all working fine. So make sure we're not going to get all loads of lint and stuff on those. I'm going to grab our M.2. So again, this is the PNY Accelerate CS3030. Clipping in. Now this motherboard, when you put the cover back on, it also screws it down. So we're just going to literally pop this down, find where it sits into the groove. There. And then down it goes. So typically you'd see a screw for the M.2, then if you have a plate that goes on the top, you'll then find another screw, but this is kind of all in one, so a little bit different, but all does the same thing. If you're using this board from new, make sure you peel off the tape that's on the back of the thermal pad so you don't have the blue plastic touching the M.2 because that's not going to help you at all. That's all installed underneath. Next up, we've got the memory. We can literally just shuffle it around. So we're going to use slots 2 and 4 furthest away from the processor. This is how you'd typically find it, but refer to your motherboard manual just in case it's a little bit different. It could vary, but it's very rare. But it's better to be safe than sorry. Let's get these installed. I think the white looks really nice with the silver. It's definitely going to go well together. Very nice. So I think that's pretty much all we can do on the motherboard, so we can get this into the case. So in terms of preparation for the case, I've just undone the tie wrap for the I/O and I'm going to push it back through. Now, although these cables are going to be used on the front panel, they're just quite long, so I'm going to route these back through and then I'm going to route them myself later with a smaller cable run just to make things a little bit more tidy. Quickly looking on the other side of this case, this is the hub I said about, and then the controller that we're not going to be using for this. It's a shame really, because all the fans and things are compatible with this controller, but the fact that the Capellix has its own non-standard connector means we're going to have to install everything into another hub just to power that, but there we go, such is life. So for our board, we're going to need to move this standoff down to here. So simple case of testing this out. They do include the right standoff remover in the box as well, so don't worry if you don't have an iFixit kit with the standoff end in it. Love Corsair cases because they've got a little kind of nub that goes into the case there, so it holds it nice and secure if you're doing it upright, but as I'm doing it flat, it's not going to make a difference to me, but nice and easy. So I'm going to grab the box of screws that's actually in the hard drive cage at the back. So I'm going to find our motherboard screws, refer to the manual if you're not using this case because it might be different. So I'm quickly just going to mention that I would usually put the power supply in by now, but because this case is kind of like in a separate section to it, I'm actually going to do it after. And there we have it. So now we can grab our cooler out of the box and we'll get that in. This was kindly sent out by Corsair for this build and I'm very excited to use this. So we're obviously going to use the own hub. There's that proprietary connector that I mentioned. Just see it through there for the actual pump. So these are the, I think they're ML120s that come with this, but we're not going to be using those. So we shall leave those in there. I'll put the bits and bobs to the side for now while we get this out. Pre-applied thermal paste, which is nice. Saves me having to apply some separately. Then we're going to pull the Intel brackets off that we don't need. So I've found the two AMD brackets. We're going to use this side further up towards the Corsair logo. So as it's horizontal, we can have one this side and then one up this side. This will just push in. Can be a little bit tight, so be careful with your fingers. That's one side. And then do the other side. There we go. Nice little squeeze, and that's ready to add our little brackets onto. There's a label in the box called MISC hardware, and we're going to find ourselves 2 thumb screws. So then what we're going to do is take one of these little catches, thread it up from the bottom, and then we're going to put the thumb screw on lightly from the other side. We will need it loose to go around the catch, but then we'll do it up and then secure it down. So that's loosely on one side. Apologies, it's quite tricky to show you and record it at the same time, but there we go. So that's loosely on, and then that's ready to be mounted. Before you put the fans on, I recommend you think about the orientation you're going to use. So for me, I'm going to do it this way with the hoses coming out the right side. So I'm going to put the fans on, but then have the cables coming out this way. That will just make cable management a little bit easier and a little bit more clean than if they were to come out the opposite side. So we're going to take these fans, put these down. We're going to want to push the air through the radiator and out. Alternatively, for longer term use and make it easier for cleaning, you could go with the fans on this side. So it's going to pull through the radiator and then you can just clean this side off for dust. But because we want to show all of the RGB in its glory, I'm going to put them on this side. So we've got 8 long screws and 8 washers. I'll put the screw onto the washer. I'm just going to thread that through. Line it up with our threads. There you go. Just do it loose for now. Same again, obviously for each corner. Now I'm going to do 2 for each fan just because this is just like a show build and showing you how to do it. But for your own build, whacking all four, because obviously you're not going to be taking things apart. Quick mention to the dust filter that's on the 280X. It's really nice, simple and magnetic. Literally just goes in, finds its own place. Really great, simple but quality. We're going to take our radiator and put it in this way, as I said earlier. Now, if you're doing the opposite and you're putting your fans on this side, you will need the longer screws to go down through the case, through the fan into the radiator. But because we're doing it in a push configuration, it's just going to be the smaller screws. Okay, so what I've done here is put 2 screws in on each end of the radiator just to hold it and make your life a lot easier, basically. Then we're going to take more of the screws and do the other ones, so do the ends first. So then we're going to carry on and screw all these in. That goes back down. So now we can install the pump onto the cooler and we're closer to being done. So I'm going to try and do this the best I can without getting the pump hoses in the way. But we're going to put this down, find our latches. There's one, there's the other, and then we'll do it up. Really nice and easy on this cooler. There we go. So I've done this cable. This is a very thin cable as well, so be careful for that one. I'm going to route this up the top. I've routed the fans through this little grommet down here. Was a little bit tricky, so it's probably easier to do that before you put the actual radiator in, but you know, hindsight and all that. Here's where the cable goes for the Capellix. It's quite a thick cable though, so it's a little bit harder to route, but it's okay nevertheless. So this is the fan header that comes with the H100i Elite Capellix. Here is where we're going to plug in our pump. There's 2 little lines on there as well to make it easy to show you how it's going to fit. It's going to clip in like so. Now this cable here is one of the RGB headers from the LL120s that I installed separately, and just to show you that it will go into the H100i Elite Capellix hub, so don't have to worry about any compatibility problems, it will all work. So this is going to be powered by a SATA cable, and then we've got the USB header for our motherboard, but other than that it's pretty straightforward. So getting quite near the end now, so our SF750 is up next. So inside we've got some screws, a case badge, loads of zip ties, which is nice, power cable. Now, one thing I do like about the SF750 is all the cables are sleeved, which is one thing that you won't find with some other, you know, ATX power supplies. Here's the adapter for SF to ATX, which we're going to need for our case. And under here we have our Diddy SF750. So small. I love how compact it is. So as I mentioned, as we're using the smaller form factor power supply in a full-size case, we're going to be adding the adapter. Just make sure you've obviously got the right power supply for your case. So I've got out the cables we're going to need. We've got obviously the 24 pin, which is the one we're undoubtedly going to need. A 8 pin for the CPU, our set for our hub power. The 24 pin only goes one way, because it's got a different connector on the end, so that's going to be this side in there, and then this one in there. Put the PCI in the front, put that in the other end just to make it a little bit more clear, and then our last one, SATA and peripheral, we'll put on the top. So this is the way we're going to be putting the power supply in, so let's get this screwed in. So there we go, that's our SF750 installed. It looks very dwarfed in this case, but as I did mention, this does take a full-size ATX. This is more for the people that are using a case that only takes an SF power supply. We will pass through the cables we need now. So 24 pin, we're going to put it through the bottom grommet here. Our PCI cable, that's going to come in through the same grommet, be it underneath. There we go. Now we need to pass our 8 pin up the top, because the SATA is going to stay behind the back, and then I'm going to cable this all up. So 8 pin is going to come up through the top here. It's quite a nice lot of space, to be fair, so that's not really going to be a problem. Again, the cable's coming up through this gap here and into the 8 pin. Right, so admittedly it is a bit of a hodgepodge, but this is the Elite Capellix controller. So we've got the pump coming into the top, the fans that we put in the top going into the hub. I've had to undo the ones that were with the front panel, but they're in there as well, and then the power on the other side. But thankfully, just because of the sheer amount of space we've got in the side of this, once you take out the cages, it's just a case that you can fit what you need to and then just put the side on and really not worry about it, because it's not clear, you can't see through it, so we can get away with just literally putting the side on and calling it done. So here I've just routed the Front panel connections. You may need to check on the motherboard you're using if it's not this exact one, but mine seems to be power minus, power plus, power switch, and then the reset is on the bottom row right to the end. Our 24 pin is in, and then this is our USB 3. Now we just have our PCI cables left for our graphics card. So this is our 2070 Super AMP edition from Zotac. So first step to put a graphics card in is to undo these two screws here. This will then release the bracket. Then we can take out the covers that we don't need, which in our case will be the first two. This may vary if you're using a different graphics card. Take those out. So we're going to open up the little clip so the card's going to fit in, and then slot this in, get a bit of a wiggle till we get a click. There we go. There's a little bit of flex in the back of the case I've noticed, but we just need to push that in gently to screw it back in. So that's just the opposite of what we did to undo it. I'm going to flip this back up, screw this back in, and that's in. Just need to plug it in. So this card requires a 6 and an 8, so what I'm going to do is tuck this one together to make the 8, which will be this side here, furthest away. Then what I might do is just cable tie this down like that, just to keep it out of the way, because obviously you have got a spare 2 pins, and we don't want it flapping about. But that is it. Let's just train this cable down a little bit so it's going to stay out of the way. And she's done. Let's see if it boots. Okay, we've got motherboard lights, which is always promising. And 3, 2, 1. Oh, look at that. That is looking very nice. I don't know if you'll be able to actually tell on camera. It's very bright. Let's see if we get a post screen. Can take a little bit of while to train memory and things like that. Oh, yep, we go. Press delete to get into the BIOS. Here we go. So, what have we got? We've got our Ryzen 5 5600 6-core processor. So that's 6 cores, 12 threads. Processor speed 3700 megahertz or 3.7 gigahertz. That max boost is up to 4.6. We've got our 16 gigabytes of memory, both recognized are 8 gig each. 2133, we need to change that because that's the standard speed, and they're 3600 megahertz modules. So we're going to OC XMP settings, XMP 2.0 profile 1. So that will set it to 3600 over our 2133, which is standard, and then change from 1.21 volts to 1.35. So we go F10 and then enter to save the changes. So now let's get into Windows and get on with some benchmarks. Just change the ISO on the camera so you can see it a little bit better. It does look very nice with the RGB. And then as it's all into the hub and also using Corsair memory, it's all very much in a similar syncing pattern, so very, very nice. So first up, we've got Far Cry 6. Big thanks to AMD for sending the key over too. We are using the high preset, which is what Far Cry actually detected from our hardware, which is what I wanted to run, so that worked out well. Using 2560 by 1440 resolution, everything set to high, maximum anti-aliasing. Motion blur is off because it's horrendous, and then we've got the extended features off. So let's run the benchmark and see what kind of settings and frames we get. Also staying tuned as well, we'll be streaming Far Cry 6 at some point, so that's something to look forward to. Great explosion effects on this game. Looks very nice. So average frames, we got a 90, maximum of 103 and a minimum of 56. 5,545 frames, and then it covers over the resolutions and stuff that I said. So 2560 by 1440, VSync is off, frame lock is off. Refresh rate 60 Hz, but that's this monitor. If you've obviously got a higher refresh rate monitor, then you will get a higher result. And then high graphics quality. So next I think we'll go on to Battlefield 5. So going on to Battlefield 5, we've got 2560 by 1440 again. We've got no motion blur because again it's horrible, and then we've got the cinematic effects and stuff on. I wouldn't generally use them personally, but for the sake of most users may have them on, so that's what we're going to go with. Feature frame rate is off, vertical sync is also off, and then the high preset for quality. Currently averaging 130 frames. So very nice. It looks great as well. So still averaging about 125, there's a 135 there. So the 2070 Super definitely doing bits for this gameplay. Let's try and get him a bandage as well. There we go. Not bad thus far. Let's try and raise this guy. There we go. Up to the 150s now for frames. So, oh, that was pretty good. Oh no! Wow, I'm very impressed. That feels very smooth as well. So, I think. Oh, I'm so tempted to just carry on playing, but we need to move to the next benchmark. So on to Dirt 5, I've gone for the full high preset and then 2560 by 1440. Obviously the sweet spot for this graphics card. And let's see how we get on. And we're getting about 130 frames, which is quite good. I really need to stick to this green line if I can. That's where I'm going wrong. There we go. Really much better experience when you play with the controller, but for the sake of, I guess, of frames, this will do. So now on to, well, that certainly wasn't the right way, was it? Went down to 120 there, 128, 120. So 120 is a kind of, we can safely say 120 frames of an average is where we're coming out on high graphics, which is pretty good. So onto Shadow of the Tomb Raider again, 2560 by 1440. We've got Direct 12 and NVIDIA RTX DLSS on as well, just to see how we go. For settings, I've gone with the high preset, so you can see it changes in the background for the selections, but it looks really good just in the background here. So let's run the benchmark and see what kind of frames we get. So Tomb Raider is telling us 110, 114. Frame View is telling us pretty much the same, so that is actually accurate. Looks great though. You might notice a few dips in the frame rate if you were to go a higher quality, so I think high is a good preset, especially when using 2560 by 1440. Okay, so results averaged 110 throughout that, which is really good. Breaking it down a little bit more, we had a minimum of 94 frames, maximum of 155, and an average of 113. I'm pretty impressed with that. On to Valorant, everything is set to high. This was actually set by the game itself when I logged in, so obviously it's going to recommend those kind of settings, which is nice. So averaging about 420, 380. Oh, actually got a kill on a person. God blimey. Again, headshot as well. God, there might be hope for me yet. So yeah, still sticking around 400 frames, so very nice. Obviously high settings and anti-aliasing and stuff is on as well, so certainly nice quality. But yeah, very good. 2070 Super is definitely doing a good job for our games. So last but not least, we have Apex Legends, everything set to high. I did turn off VSync and did add some spot shadow detail as well up to high. But everything else is set 2560 1440. Let's go and apply that and jump into a game. So a little bit of a dip there down to 90. That's where we're going across the zip line. It's not found anyone though. Oh, I'm going to take it out straight away. Well, these are for purely frame rates rather than actual showing any skill, which I clearly don't have. So we were around 100 frames up to 120, 130s in some scenarios, so still very good, nice high quality and a great frame rate. So there we have it guys, that is the compact price to performance or bang for buck PC build. Hope you enjoyed watching this. I tried to get as much information as I could in a short space of time. These videos do take a long time to make, and that then kind of transfers into the video's length. But you know, I did cut out as much as the waffle that I could, but trying to retain as much information as I can give you guys. Also, if there's any more games that you want to see in the benchmarks, then do let me know and I'll make sure to add them for future videos. One thing I didn't mention about this build, but I just wanted to touch upon, was the thermal performance. The cooler hit a maximum of 61 degrees and the graphics card hit a maximum of 75. A little bit warmer for the graphics card, but you could always add some extra fans, as there are 120 and 140 millimeter mounts in the bottom. So you could suck some fresh air in with some fans under there if you find your graphics card's getting a little bit too hot. But 75 is okay for what we were doing. All of the products that I used in this video will be linked down below for your convenience. Don't forget, if you're going to be using this case, you can get an ATX power supply rather than a small form factor, but the one I used in this is what the majority use for smaller compact cases, so just double check what yours is going to take. So last but not least, a big thanks to all the companies that sent out parts for this build. So we've got the 5600X from Memory C, I will link their website down below. The power supply case and cooler was from Corsair. We also had the M.2 from PNY and the graphics card from NVIDIA. So thank you all for watching this, guys. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you subscribe and ding the bell so you don't miss an upload. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.